Francisco Pizarro was the kind of man who crawled out of poverty with a knife between his teeth and enough resentment to burn an empire. And born around 1478 in Trujillo, an unforgiving corner of Extremadura that produced more conquerors than crops. He grew up the illegitimate son of a minor soldier who barely admitted his existence and a mother who had neither time nor resources to raise another mouth. So young Francisco learned early that the world owed him nothing, that strength was the only law, and that hunger was the most honest teacher. Illiterate, barefoot, tending pigs for a few coins, he watched noble families ride past him with the indifference of gods and silently vowed that one day he would climb high enough to look down on all of them. In Spain, that dream was impossible, but across the ocean, in a world Europeans barely understood, it was within reach. So Pizarro boarded a ship with nothing but desperation and an iron will, joining the waves of adventurers, outcasts, criminals, and dreamers who believed the new world was a giant treasure chest waiting to be cracked open. In the Caribbean, he fought battles, suffered diseases, hacked through jungles, survived storms, mutinies, hunger, betrayal. Yet every time death brushed against him, he slid past it like a shadow. In Panama, he became a minor official and pig farmer, which for a normal man might have been enough. But Pizarro had the same flaw shared by many people who grow up with nothing. Once he tasted power, he needed more. And once he tasted gold, he needed all of it. When stories spread of a vast empire to the south, a land of mountains and temples ruled by a god-king, overflowing with gold so abundant it decorated walls and fountains, Pizarro felt destiny tug at him. This was no longer ambition, it was obsession. With his partners Diego de Almagro and the priest Hernando de Luque, he launched expeditions southward that ended in starvation, disease, and misery, losing men and ships to storms and indigenous resistance. But he refused to quit. His defining moment came on the tiny island of Gallo when his men were collapsing from hunger and demanded retreat. Pizarro drew a line in the sand with his sword and said, "Those who wish to become rich, follow me." It was not inspiration. It was extortion masked as glory, but a handful crossed that line. Those steps sealed the fate of the Inca Empire. In 1532, Pizarro returned with barely 168 men, a few horses, and a lifetime of ruthlessness. He landed on the shores of the greatest empire in the Americas, a civilization of millions, with roads, palaces, engineering marvels, and armies larger than anything Spain could field. But it was bleeding from a recent civil war between two royal brothers, Atahualpa and Huascar. Disease brought by earlier Europeans was ravaging the population, and political stability hung by a thread. Pizarro understood one timeless truth of conquest. You don't defeat an empire at its strongest, you wait until it stumbles. He invited Atahualpa, the victorious Sapa Inca, to a meeting in the city of Cajamarca. The emperor arrived unarmed, carried on a golden litter, surrounded by thousands of attendants, confident that these foreigners were curiosities, not threats. He was wrong. Pizarro staged one of the most brutal ambushes in world history. A friar presented Atahualpa with a Bible and demanded conversion. The emperor, confused or insulted, tossed it aside. The Spaniards had their pretext. Cannons erupted, horses charged, gunfire echoed through the square, steel crashed into flesh. Panic tore through the crowd of unarmed attendants who had never seen horses or heard explosions. It was not a battle, it was a massacre. Thousands died. Spanish casualties, 0. Pizarro himself seized Atahualpa, shielding him from harm, not out of compassion but calculation. The emperor was worth more alive than dead. As prisoner, Atahualpa attempted to save himself with the only weapon he had left, gold. He offered to fill a room with gold up to his height, and another twice with silver, if the Spaniards would release him. Pizarro accepted. Over months, an unimaginable fortune arrived from all corners of the empire. Gold statues, ceremonial plates, jewelry, artifacts of profound cultural and spiritual importance. Spaniards melted centuries of Inca heritage into ingots like barbarians trying to convert beauty into weight. Once the ransom was paid, Pizarro did what greedy men always do once they get everything they want. He broke his promise. Atahualpa was put on trial for treason against his own empire. Idolatry, the same crime all indigenous people were guilty of, and conspiracy. The verdict was decided before the charges were written. Pizarro ordered him executed. With the emperor dead, the Inca Empire shattered. Spanish forces marched through it like wolves through an unguarded flock. Cities surrendered or were looted. Nobles submitted or were executed. Temples were stripped. Entire provinces rebelled. But rebellion alone cannot defeat steel, horses, and gunpowder, especially when introduced into a society weakened by plague and civil war. Pizarro reached Cuzco, the Inca capital, a city of stone palaces, temples, and sacred sites older than Spain itself. He plundered it, declared it conquered, and then founded Lima on the coast, a city meant to serve as the nerve center of Spain's new empire in South America. He had achieved everything he dreamed of: land, wealth, power, fame. For a man born with nothing, he now possessed so much that reality itself struggled to contain it. But men like Pizarro will never live in peace because they are incapable of sharing power. Trouble began with the very partners who had helped him. Diego de Almagro believed he deserved half of the empire and demanded the city of Cuzco. Pizarro refused. What followed was a civil war within the conquest itself. Conquistador against conquistador, greed fighting greed, ambition eating ambition. Pizarro captured Almagro and had him executed, ignoring the pleas of Almagro's son, Diego el Mozo, who swore revenge. That revenge came in 1541. By then Pizarro was old, gout-ridden, paranoid, but still deadly. When assassins stormed his palace in Lima, he fought them with the same stubborn fury he brought to Cajamarca. He killed 2 attackers, slashed a third, and refused to fall until they overwhelmed him. As he lay dying on the floor of his stolen palace, he traced a cross in his own blood, perhaps a final act of faith, perhaps one last performance for a god he had rarely obeyed. Francisco Pizarro died surrounded by the ghosts of those he had destroyed. Atahualpa, the Incas, old allies, betrayed partners, entire civilizations collapsed under his ambition. But the most disturbing truth about Pizarro is not the killings, not the empire he shattered, not the gold he melted, not the cities he plundered. It's that he was celebrated for it. Spain honored him. Chroniclers glorified him. Statues praised him. His story became a triumphant narrative rather than a tragedy. Only centuries later did the world look closely enough to see the devastation behind the legend, because Pizarro was not a genius, nor a statesman, nor a hero. He was something far simpler, far darker. A man who refused to accept the world he was born into, and who built a new one entirely out of greed, violence, improvisation, and luck. He is the embodiment of the age of conquest, brutal, relentless, unapologetic. His life proves that history is not shaped only by kings or philosophers, but by ruthless men who arrive at the right moment with the wrong ambitions. And in the end, that is what makes Pizarro terrifying. Not the empire he ended, but the civilization he represented, one where a handful of desperate men could cross an ocean and erase a world.